Welcome to Complex Creatures, exploring spirituality and the common good.
Hello, welcome to Complex Creatures, a podcast that focuses on spirituality, both in its forms and practices, to think about how spirituality can be this underutilized tool for the way we operate publicly, the common good, someone might say, or at least the public sphere. I like to just remind people that in our day and age, people tend to think of spirituality as something about personal development or your own just kind of growth, but this can be a tool that helps shape a wider conversation that we're having out in the world. I'm Jarrod Longbonds. I'm a senior minister at a historic church in Midtown called Peachtree Christian Church, Midtown, Atlanta, Georgia. I have a PhD in theology, and I've just been interested in spirituality as a personal expression, but also from obviously from an academic and vocational perspective. I'm joined as always by Alan, my good buddy, who's producing and talking to me today. Hi, Alan. How are you?
Doing great, man. How are you?
And I'm doing well. It's been a couple weeks since we recorded because of some travel and some health issues. And so we are, I say that to everyone because as we're recording this is going to be the second part of an exploration that Alan has been having with me about my own personal experience over the last 2 years. To get everyone up to speed, if this is your first time joining us, 2 years ago around this time, I almost died because I was in liver failure and did not know it. The way I experienced it, it was like it all came upon me quickly. And then I kind of had a long road of sitting out of work on medical leave, just trying to get stable to come back to work and figure out whether or not my liver would heal, only to then find out I probably needed to go through the process of transplantation surgery. And I walked through that process, and I did less than a year ago, I'm still in the first year, receive a liver transplant. And I tell people that has definitely been a health journey, but for me, ultimately, the entire experience has been a spiritual pilgrimage. So last time, Alan was talking to me about some of the journey, and today we're going to talk further. And that's my little setup, so I'm going to hand it over to you, Alan, and you ask questions and kind of lead us, and I'll just see what comes of it.
So when we talked before, I was really more concerned about human interaction issues. I was really talking to you about how this impacted your relationships with your wife and your relationships with other people. But I got to ask, man, when you first learned that you nearly died due to liver failure, what was your spiritual reaction? Did you? I mean, I don't think that I understand if you were doing any blaming of God for this situation, or you felt abandoned by God in this situation. Like what, how did that work?
I think the immediate feeling I had was of regret, and also a sense of self-flagellation, because I had been walking in time with some sense of hypochondria. I mean, undiagnosed. I just always thought I had something really bad going on with me, but I was also at the same time sort of phobic about going to the doctor. So I would worry about a pain or a feeling in my body, and then I would obsess on it, ruminate. Mm-hmm. And I would even talk about it to people that know and love me, and they would say, you should go to the doctor. And that would be something I would rebuff. And so I would rely on friends to say, and family and my wife, and this was a big burden on her, I'd rely on them to say, you're okay though, man, don't worry about it. They were somehow responsible for my anxiety. And I know that was a lot for them to carry. We talked about that some last time, but when it finally happened, I'm like, well, of course this was going to happen. I mean, you were expecting the shoe to drop. And so there was like that, and then the feeling of regret, because then it's like, well, why didn't you just do the logical thing that you would have advised to every other person who seeks your counsel? You would have said, go to the doctor. And so then the self kind of, beating up, self-flagellation happened. As time went on, I often say, as I reflect on this, and I'm writing some of these in a memoir, sort of a theological memoir now, and a working title for that is A Jaundiced Spirituality, because quite literally my body was jaundiced, but for a little bit, so is my spiritual expression, because I allowed myself to go down those narrative like bunny rabbit trails where I would think, why? I mean, I live a pretty boring life. I live a pretty I don't live wildly. Now, I think that I needed to change my relationship to alcohol. I don't think I was an alcoholic, but I definitely think that it was something that did impact my health, and I didn't realize how bad until, my body does not handle alcohol well, is what I've learned. And had I been keeping my medical health as part of my just holistic health and spiritual practice alive, I would have been much more wise. But so there was moments where I sitting there, that kind of jaundiced spirituality, like, I do the right stuff, man. I get paid less than I could get paid in another line of work because I'm committing to what I think is what God wants from me, and I try to raise my kids a certain way. I try to give, all the stuff. You can go down the checklist, and so there was a sense in which it was, something's not fair. I mean, that wasn't the overriding feeling all the time, but it was there in the operating system, just kind of running in the background, for sure.
Sure, not fair. So, as you're feeling that this is that what's happening to you is not fair, are you praying about it? Are you meditating about it? How are you communicating this to God?
I think in the first bit, especially when I was in the hospital, in that first week, 2 weeks, I was in the hospital twice. Once there's the emergency kind of, you need to go to the ER now. They got that stable, went home. And then at home, I kept completely just spun, or circled the drain, because my kidneys started to fail too. And that's when I was like hours from death. It took, I would say, through all that time, there wasn't a whole lot of there wasn't a lot happening because my faculties were so polluted by the encephalopathy. And, so I kind of think I moved in some form to acceptance of things pretty quickly. I'm like, okay, am I dying now? Is this what's happening? Let's get my mind around it. That kind of thing was happening pretty quickly. The gears were turning. But I would get visited by some friends, some clergy friends or people. And I was, adamant that I'm going to go back to work. I mean, I was very focused on how this wasn't going to sideline me. I mean, I was just delusional, Alan. So when I got to a headspace where my mind was clear enough to actually accept where I was, I heard the words echo in my ear of Reverend Dr. Denise Bell, who at the time was in a capacity in her role in our area of the country is she's kind of serving as a pastor to pastors in our tradition. So she came to see me. I remember at the hospital at the time was still under COVID restrictions. So we got her in by telling the people that she was my bishop. And she came and sat with me, and she said, amongst other things, told me that it was my one job in life, and that was to get healthy. And I needed to let go of worrying about work. I needed to let go of everything else except for getting physically healthy and emotionally healthy and spiritually healthy. And so those first few weeks when I started getting some clarity, I kept hearing those words, and I said, I have to continue working in every area of my life. It was a real issue of obedience and submission to somebody else other than my own thinking. So I maintained seeing my therapist. I'll tell you, the first time I saw him, he was really worried about me. We saw each other over Zoom, and he called me later, and he said, or actually this is the next Zoom meeting I had with him, he said, I was so much clearer because if I operated the way I did the week before, he wasn't going to see me because I was he was so worried about me. I was so out of it. He didn't think it was even helpful. Sure. And so, I mean, that's the low level of functionality I had for a time, but I'd maintained seeing a therapist to process it. And then I decided also that I probably should seek spiritual direction. And I'll tell you why, because in my home, my parents live with us, and my wife and 3 kids are there. And on Sundays, they get up and go to church. And for those first few weeks, I would live stream our service. And I don't like live streaming church, period. But in that moment, it made me feel even more isolated and alone. My family's there, loved ones are there, the congregation that I love is there, the people I work with that I love are there. I can't be. And so it became not healthy for me to even engage it. So I started seeing a spiritual director, and then I started doing my own practices that he would direct me on. I meet with him once a month, and I started doing Lectio Divina. When I started walking again, he wanted me to imagine walking with Jesus. And he even said, I wanted to be an earthy Jesus. Don't think of like the Christ or the second person of the Trinity. He goes, he wanted me to walk with a bloody, sweat, fleshy Jesus, which I thought was sort of cheesy. And I kind of rolled my eyes for a while. But I can tell you later how I took him up on it and how it made an impact. But I started trying to practice practices that he would put in my pathway.
Sure.
To try to sense where God might be speaking still. And I otherwise might not be hearing him because I'm too caught up in my own mental detritus and garbage.
Well, okay. So I mean, you've talked a little bit about what that garbage is, but so was this moment where you're doing these exercises where you're walking with fleshy Jesus? Is that when you're beginning to get to a point where you're thinking through the spirituality of this in a healthier, positive way, or was there something else that caused you to come back, or were you still going down the rabbit hole of whatever kinds of issues that you had spiritually before you were able to turn that around?
Yeah, so like get sick at the end of August. Labor Day really marks the day when I don't go back to work. You know, that's when I always think on the calendar is Labor Day. Through September, I think I'm spiraling, getting more jaundiced in my spirituality. You know, I stopped live streaming church. I start watching, movies on Sunday, like Rocky movies or anything that's going to make me feel good, sort of that almost emotional, cathartic, whatever film. I mean, that was like the best I could do for myself, because the rest of it was basically sort of bitter. I mean, I stand in front of people and speak is a large part of my job, and I now no longer have a voice. And I don't think people want to hear my voice in my family. I think my voice was frustrated and irritated and small and pleased with myself and ashamed. And I wasn't my best at all. I was impatient with people, impatient with my diet, impatient with my bodily weakness. So through September, end of September, October, I started being able to walk more than a block. I mean, it took me like a long time to just even start getting up and moving my body. And it would take me to take one loop around the neighborhood. It would take me a long time, and I'd have to stop and catch my breath, and I'd take a cane and I'd listen to music. I'd try to get outside just for mental like relief of the rumination of the thinking that could barely, if it got outside of my head, it hit the ceilings and the walls of a room. I mean, it didn't go far. I needed to be outside to let it open. And it was in October when I reached out to the spiritual director, and we started in November. And the first thing he said to me was, start doing Lectio Divina, which for those of you who don't know what that is, this is sort of an ancient Christian practice of reading / contemplating or contemplative prayer of Scripture. You're not reading with a commentary. You're not reading like a study Bible trying to find out like how the clauses work. It's not about breaking down grammar or the historicity of it or who wrote what to whom. You're trying to embody the stories of the text. You're trying to get inside of it. So, there's steps. You can look them up anywhere, but there's a way to begin with prayer, and then there's a reading, and as you kind of read over and over and over, and then you kind of put yourself in the text. And then, so, you're doing this contemplative read. Well, the way he instructed me to do it, Alan, was he said, take out a journal, or whatnot, and just read a section. He wanted me to start with a gospel. He said, not John. He wanted me to do Matthew, Mark, or Luke, because there's where the earthy Jesus is. My spiritual director is into that concept for some reason, or maybe he thought I needed it. He does know I'm a theologian, so he said he would always challenge me for like ever about overthinking or over intellectualizing this stuff, because he's like, don't forget that you can over rationalize your way through it too. So get to on the ground with Jesus. Okay, great. So I choose Luke because that year we're coming up near Advent, and it's going to go through the Luke story. That's all the great birth story stuff of Jesus, right? All right. So I sit down, and what he said to do was, you're reading a section. He said, just, pray and read, walk me through the steps. And he goes, I like to just bullet point almost, like just things that stick out, just things that are interesting to you. And then you look at it, and it's almost like, after looking at it, you kind of like see a picture of maybe how God is speaking to you in that passage, right? And so I'm doing that. And what I would do, because I have a hard time not being more systematic, is I would write down some like unifying reflection at the end. But it was when I got to one of the earlier songs of Advent, as they call them. There's Zechariah, who's this who's this temple worker who has been unable to speak. There's like a whole prophecy around his life that he's waiting for the Messiah, and he's not able to speak until he sees the fulfillment of the Messiah come. And Jesus is presented in the temple on the 8th day of his life, right? And this is the custom. And that's when he's able to speak. And what really just started sticking out profoundly in that reading, that Lectio Divina contemplative reading on that day, and it was on a Sunday when everyone was at church, and I sat at my study desk, my home studies desk, and I sat there, I was reading it, is like, oh dear God, here's a man who his voice was taken away from him, a man whose voice was used as part of his vocation to God and to the people, what he did for them. And he could not speak. And he was called to bear witness before he could speak. And it was just as if God was saying to me, bear witness now. Don't speak. Don't worry that you don't have your voice. And that's when this kind of moment started taking a bit of a turn for me, because I was humbled again.
Sure.
I mean, I was already humbled, but I was bittered by my physical humility. But now I was being, in a way, spiritually humbled. And I realized that I needed to stand in more awe and trembling over the fact of my life, that my life had been something I hadn't taken seriously enough, or hadn't been for a while. And I realized that this thing that I have called life is itself a revelation of God, and I needed to bear witness to it and so many other things. Later, walks would come at length when I was able to go further and stronger. The spiritual director asked me what I like to do. I said walks. At that time, Alan, and I'll let you chime in with any more questions. At that time, I was listening to music that I would put together and, and like certain lists and mixes that were, I mean, this is just embarrassing to admit. They were songs they would lead me down to the ring to fight if I were a fighter, or walking up to the batter's box. I mean, whatever made me feel motivated and good, Don't Back Down by Tom Petty, or I Won't Back Down. I mean, as an example of a song that was like an anthem during that time, because I felt like I had to feel myself, because I had no agency. So I had to feel myself, and I would walk every day because it would hurt, and it was a struggle, and I have to do this for my life, and I got to fight and claw to get through this and live. And that was how I was doing my walks, even when I started walking 2.5, 3 miles a day. But then the director said, quit listening to music and imagine that you're walking with Jesus.
Right.
I smiled, and then I promptly did not do that.
Okay, so I'm backing up just a smidgen. I'm really interested in this moment where you reach out to the spiritual director. And the reason I'm interested in this moment is because I am a fairly arrogant man. And I don't think that I would have reached out to anyone in that circumstance. I would have thought that I could muscle my way through it. What was it that caused you to even do the reaching out? Because you have this moment after you've reached out where you're starting to see Zechariah as a metaphor or analogy for what you're going through. But before you get there, how do you even get to the point where you reach out to this guy?
That's a great question. And I have to go back a couple of years and say that, my admin assistant has been working with me for 8 years, and many different times she would encourage me because I had those rumination worries about things. Saying I struggle with some generalized anxiety, and she would say, you should see a therapist. And then she would look at me, because, that can come across judgmental if, she wasn't being that. She was being caring. But because it can come across odd, she would always smile and say, you really need someone on Team Jarrod. She kept saying that to me. You just need a team. You need to know that they're on your team, and they're on your team, and they're there to support you. And she goes, just like your doctors are on Team Jarrod. Well, I just absolutely avoided that until it was COVID, Alan. And then I really was feeling that pressure added to the anxieties. And I just thought, I got to do it. And so it took me a long time to get there with that. With spiritual direction, I had thought for years, just like therapy, this would be a good thing for me. I just used every excuse that men use. I'm busy. I got too much to do. I mean, and I also thought spiritual direction was like, I was uniquely interested in it. Like, I wasn't scared of it like therapy. I was more interested in it because of what I do and what I study. So I thought that would be fascinating, if nothing else. Even if even if I didn't get much out of it, I thought it would be very fascinating to go through this kind of, since the time of Ignatius of Loyola, right? Like this kind of practice of holy listening and walking with a spiritual friend in that way. I mean, I just thought that would be really fascinating, but never the time, good intentions. I'll do it sometime. And I think it's just that moment of, well, I probably should try something else. And I could hear that Reverend Dr. Denise Bell in the background, because she didn't ask me to get healthy. She told me to.
Sure.
She told me. And I can be arrogant just like any man or any woman, any person, but I also can listen to people and I can submit. And when you're at that kind of bottom low, it's easier to just say, okay, you're right, because clearly the choices I've made haven't been helpful. So that was kind of the point. And what it was is simple enough. I mean, I sent out an email to we have this the Ignatius House in Sandy Springs, on the north side of town here in Atlanta, and they got a list of directors. I said, hey, I'm curious, what's this like? And they're like, they call me up and like, what are you interested in? And I laid out my situation, like, we have a guy for you, right? And he calls me up, and I mean, it was almost easy to avoid, because he's like, yeah, well, we have this like pre-screened phone call. He's like, we'll talk in a month. And I could have like canceled 100 times. And I think it was really beneficial. I was just doing nothing, Alan. I mean, I had no social interactions. I even got, I get dressed nicely to go see him, drive across town the once a month, because I wasn't going to have to wear sweatpants. I could get out of sweatpants. Mm-hmm. So at first it was kind of like that. And now I consider him to be part of Team Jarrod, like my therapist and my doctors, which is, that's a good acceptance for me.
Okay. So now, bouncing forward again to you having this I'm going to call it an epiphany moment with the metaphor for Zechariah. Did that like begin you on a path towards any sort of specific like spiritual activities? Was this when you started doing getting more involved with prayer or meditative walks or whatever the practices are to help you wrap your head around things, or is there still more spiraling to go through?
It's not a direct path. So, I think that was a linchpin moment, or, a turning, whatever you want to call it. There was a moment of progress. I could fake my way through enough spiritual direction because I have a life of spirituality. So I could talk about prayer, and I do pray, and I just don't know if I was as intentional or as deliberate until that Zechariah moment, where I was like, you just try something someone suggests. And, I'm not saying it works like this for everyone, but because I saw some sort of immediate, there was something that happened, it's like, whoa, okay, there's insights still be had over a text I've read 1,000 times. Like, you're not done with this stuff. It's not done with you. And that brought the humility, because, later when he did say, go on a walk and don't listen to your music and imagine walking with earthly Jesus, I'm thinking, that sounds like, let me just be blunt, Alan. I'm like, that sounds like kind of a shallow, consumerist cut from the evangelical world. Just give it to God, just give it to Jesus. Language I always thought in counseling was sort of bad and unclear. And I'm talking to a highly educated, scientific, lay Catholic. And I'm thinking to myself, he's smarter than this. And I smile and I tell him, sure, because I'm not willing to yet tell him what I really think. And I go, and I don't intend to do it. I keep taking my walks. I keep listening to my music. I still get good stuff out of those walks, even with music. And then one day, I couldn't get my earbuds to work. I think that's when my AirPods broke, and I had to get the old earbuds back. And so they weren't working. And so, they were glitchy. They were on and off. So I think I started with music, because I remember what happened was I was walking, trying to imagine being with Jesus at first, but still like getting a little bit bored with that. So I was just finally got my ear things working. And then now I'm walking up this very, very big hill. People are walking the other way. There's a lot of people out that day around the park. And I am walking with a strut, man. I'm feeling myself. If anyone knew what was going on in my head, it would have been an embarrassing thing. Because I had this like fight mentality. I'm going to go into the ring with this disease and I'm going to knock it out. I got a little strut. I'm walking like a tough guy. And I look to my right, and there's Jesus.
Mhm.
Like, I'm not going to even try to like explain this to anybody. Like, it was like quick, super fast. And all I can tell you then is in that moment, I did like a double take sort of thing. And in that, the split second of the double take, it was like a long period of experience happened for me, because here is the experience I had in that moment with Jesus. Jesus was not any different than like a fatherly figure or like an older brother. And I think more like an older brother is how I felt. And when he looked at me as if to say, hey man, I know what you're doing. Like, I just caught you. Like, he walked into my bedroom, catching me singing into the mirror, or at a stoplight rocking out to a song when you don't think anyone's around and someone pulls up and catches you. Like, that kind of embarrassment. Because he saw what I was doing. He saw that I was trying to be a tough guy, that I had the, cocky strut and all that stuff. He knew what was going on in my head that the people walking by me did not know. And he knew, and he didn't give me a hard time about it, except for a little ribbing and like a put an arm around my head and kind of a little noogie kind of thing, like an older brother. And it was like this: look, I see you, and you're okay, man. I see what you're doing. Now, I really don't, not telling you all these things just happened. I'm just telling you, I had this vision of Jesus, and all those feelings just flooded me. I shook, and I had to sit down on this like rock wall. And I sat there for a minute, and I didn't see Jesus for this whole long period of time. It was like this instantaneous moment with all these feelings come flooding into me. Sure. And I just thought to myself, I don't know if I fashioned Jesus in my imagination there. I'm sure God, if God's alive and real, I'm sure God works with our imagination in the way we think and engage the world. So I'm not trying to explain anything away. But if God is speaking to me, maybe the message is this: I see you, and I love you. And you're okay, man. I even see you when you're being silly. Right. You're okay. And that became a persistent message. I had a couple other spiritual experiences that were sort of like that throughout this experience of me. Sometimes I would just enter into deep contemplation, and you don't hear or feel anything. And then sometimes it would come out of left field. I was turning onto Roswell Road from Marianna in Sandy Springs. I remember why I was going this route. And I was at the stop sign, waiting for cars. I'm about to turn right. And it was, I should tell you the background is I was getting worried about coming back to work. I had been out since Labor Day, and now this is early January. I'm going to go back in February. Mm-hmm. So now I'm starting to think about what it's like. I got people on staff that I hired, and I got sick. They never worked with me. Mm-hmm. I got people who shifted positions to take over responsibilities for me. Maybe they're better off without me, right? Maybe they don't like me there. Maybe I'm just an imposter. And in that moment at that stop sign, I had this experience of communication from God. And I can't explain it. I didn't hear a voice. I don't know. It's in my head, but it's this: the church doesn't need you, and I don't need you. I just want you. Here I am worried that I'm not needed. And I feel like what God told me was, you're right. Like, all of this can exist without you. You're not essential, like, period. Your voice can be silenced, and I can use another voice or whatever it is, But the better part came with, but I'm inviting you along. I want you to be a part of whatever work that is, right? And it began to like even codify more for me that in working the way I was working, in worrying the way I was worrying, I was acting as if so much really relied on me for it to succeed or thrive or be okay. When in reality, I'm not that essential. And so that was the process where I started to learn, and I'm still trying to grow in detaching from things that are unhealthy, including from my sense of purpose to fulfill myself or approval of people.
So I see you as a fairly intellectual guy.
Okay, thanks. I think.
Yes. I think that's a compliment. But a lot of what you're telling me about right now is very, very emotionally reactive.
Yeah. It's effective. Yeah, affective.
Very good. And I guess what I'm curious about now is, did you get to the point where you started feeling like you had been using your intellectual capacity to avoid emotionalism? Or is there anything to that? Because that's what I feel like I'm sensing in the story.
I think, so I struggle with words. So emotionalism I would struggle with. I don't think that's what I've grown in. I think I've grown in, I guess I get concerned with the word isms, right? But so I guess there's kind of skirt that for now and just say that I think that because of the theological training and because I've also come up in a intellectual milieu defined by the modern age and maybe postmodern one and whatnot, I've gone through the critical questioning. It's not just this kind of pre-modern sort of fideistic sort of like, well, I believe it, that's it. I mean, there's you go from that naivete to all the critical questions that are asked about faith and belief and science and rationality and all what's provable versus what's not provable and all that. And there's then that knee-jerk reaction is to try to like even explain my spiritual experiences away or whatnot. For years, I would have told you that I longed to be the sort of Christian that I read about, at least, one description of Bonhoeffer. And if I'm not mistaken, it was probably from a man who was in jail with him or near him who said, like, for Bonhoeffer, it was clear that this was a man who did not just believe that God was, but that knew that God was, had this certainty. And I yearn for that simple certainty. Because even as a person of ardent belief, I had that separation in my mind that, comes from Kant and other modern thinkers, that there are things you can believe and then there are things you can know. And there's a distinction there. And I think in these experiences, the spiritual work, I think true spirituality engages your intellect, but it also does engage the emotions. It engages the whole self.
Sure.
And sometimes the tradition I'm a part of doesn't engage the emotional life as well. So I just think that opening has kind of expanded my sense of how God might work through the whole human. And I think one of the benefits is I now no longer care to explain things away to people, just to show that I have the intellectual rigor to show you how I know that this experience might be explained by certain naturalistic, materialistic events or whatever. I don't care what you think anymore. So I've gotten closer to that sense of certainty. I would like to tell you that I have no doubts, but that's not true. But I have much less interest in proving anything to anybody. I don't care.
Okay, quick side note, just because you said something that I'm curious about. What do you think it is about us as Christians that feel like we're not supposed to have doubts?
Oh, I don't know. I think I could probably conjure an answer that comes from some Protestant Reformation American hangover, like a mixture of how the Protestant church really became the Church of America, how that became very propositional in the faith. So it meant that the faith is defined by sets of beliefs and not only practices, but just I have to believe this, and if I don't believe this exact thing, then I'm on the wrong side. So I think, and as that filtered down through, I think a series of anti-intellectual shifts in our culture, that produces some strains that we call fundamentalists now. And I think we got really into that kind of one-sided aspect of our faith, which I think actually, Alan, that's the reason why today you can hear about people who say that they're non-Christian evangelicals, which is a nonsensical statement, except for that the word itself has changed meaning. It's now associated with a set of political beliefs, not a set of religious convictions, but a set of political beliefs, right? In that, if that's how you identify. So what I'm trying to say is I think that the shape of faith in our culture has really pushed the idea that we would you got to hold on to certain beliefs in just a propositional format, just like a statement and belief. And if you can say you believe that, then somehow that gives you the magic elixir that you're in. And so doubt doesn't really have home there. I think the best Christians have significant doubt issues.
Sure, me too. Okay, so on that note with doubt, even though you've had your epiphany moment with Zechariah, which is what, I'm sorry if I'm still using the wrong terminology there. Are you doubting? Like, are you feeling like you're alone and that God has turned his back on you and that you are gonna die and leave your family alone? Like that is probably what would be going through my head this entire time.
I went through the process of fear, especially the very, very beginning. And several doctors looked at me and said, "I've got you," and winked at me in moments when I had those fears, which gave me, some comfort. They throughout the journey, I have a doctor give me a lot of things to worry about, but give me a lot of confidence and things like that. And so what I tried to do was to bring myself back to the present as much as possible. So if I worried too much about the long-term future, I would go into despair. So I try to bring myself as close to the present and just try to be in that. So for those of you who aren't Christians or who are just interested in other readings, I would say that besides my traditional Christian practices and therapy as well and spiritual direction, all that stuff that I was doing, I started reading more Buddhism. I started reading Stoicism. I started reading a lot of the wisdom literature associated with both Jewish and Christian scriptures, because in all three separate traditions, they have a similarity in the wisdom, in their wisdom components, like just in the way we relate to our death, and the way we relate to our temporality, and the way we handle the negative in the world. And it was a good, almost like, it was like going to the gym mentally to remind myself of things that I cannot control. And I would even say that that's present, in the Alcoholics Anonymous literature. And I read that book a long time ago, the big book, but during this time of sickness, this 1 year, the 6 months I was out, I read 100 books, and one of them was Breathing Underwater by Father Richard Rohr, which is his text on the 12-step program as it relates to Christian spirituality. And so I was focusing a lot on, what you can and cannot control, which of course is found in the Serenity Prayer by Reinhold Niebuhr. So I was searching anywhere for tools. As a good Christian, you might say, oh, all truth's God's truth, right? So I think if it's wise, it's wise. So I was looking for anything to kind of hold me up. So back to your original question, I think that I just try to keep my view to what I could manage right now, more in the present, and that was very helpful. Over time, I think that I really grew spiritually. In a lot of ways, I grew spiritually, Alan. I just only seemed to accept the things I already believed.
Okay.
Or the knowledge went from the head to now in my heart more. Like you had to go through the experience to
person.
Yeah. So I think about death a lot, and my death a lot. I practice memento mori, which Stoics, ancient Christians, like traditions talk about. So practicing thoughts of your death, thinking about your death, keeping it in front of you so that you will live a better life is kind of the whole hope of memento mori. But I think I got this sense from God in my prayers, in my centering prayer and contemplation practices, and just times of just praise, right? I get the sense from God, the persistent messaging I feel or sense that God has been saying to me this whole time is, you are okay. I've got you. Even if you die, you are okay. Right. And someone might say, well, how's that okay if you die? Mm-hmm. Well, the reframing of it is like literally changing what death means. I'm going to be fine. Like the world can come collapsing in worse ways for me than my own death.
Okay. You said something in the process of that I'm super curious about, because I want to understand what it means to you. You said that during this time you grew spiritually.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest with you, man, I've always been confused about what exactly that means, because does it mean that you attained some level of inner peace, that you felt some measure of the whole person in terms of intellect connected to heart? Is it that you felt a sense of being touched by the divine? Is it all of those things? I mean, what define growing spiritually?
Yes. The answer to your question on those examples is yes. As a theologian and as a professional clergy, I can still feel somewhat, I don't know, embarrassed about my faith. It's the wrong word because I don't hide it, but still feel like, well, I've got the odd set of beliefs or whatever and practices in my neighborhood when I talk to my neighbors. And so having that like conviction and sense of belief in your life, but then feeling socially even just a slight bit of a strangeness about it has really started to fade away. And that's because I'm a sensitive person. So not every person who's like me feels these ways. That's just me being sensitive to the opinions of other people. But that kind of fallen away. I just care less. So I've grown in detachment. detachment for a lot of Christians sounds like a bad thing. They would think that sounds more Buddhist, and it is very Buddhist. But somehow like it means we turn our backs on the world. But real detachment teaching is about being properly attached to things in life, right? It's like a proper attachment. And so I'm detaching from the level of need I needed from other people and their approval or, whatnot. So there's growth there. So it's growing stronger in my relationship to the divine, which in some sense has made me feel stronger in relationship to myself. I think growing spiritually here is kind of showing me that I can trust myself more. I remember telling my spiritual director that a couple months ago because we were going through work things and some stress at work about decisions that need to be made or whatnot. And some, mostly just anxiety of other people. And I was talking to him about it and he said, well, so what do you really think? You going to make the right choice? I go, yeah, I'm going to make the right choice. And he goes, why do you think that? I said, because I trust myself. Like I've looked at my life and I don't make just rash decisions. I usually make pretty good ones. Right. And he smiled. He goes, when you grow closer to God, you can trust yourself more. Right. And that was just a thing that I never thought about before. So it's like, I learned to trust myself in a lot of ways. I think it is a greater acceptance for the fact that my life is fragile and contingent, or a nicer way to put it is it's just needy. And I've lived into that more. Now, where it bothers me, Alan, is because for a long time, I felt like I had a superpower. Like I just cared less about the things that I used to care about. And I find it's true. People who have near-death experiences or they were on the edge of life and death, their life is like clarified. But I also find that a lot of people struggle to hold on to that clarity. And I do too, because you get back to a normal flow of things where the mundane distractions and duties pile up. And so that's why I have to actually work hard to get back to the clarity, which is a memento mori, reminding myself of my death or being reminded of what I've come through so that I'm not getting caught up in just the monkey brain thinking or in the rat race of life or however that metaphor will work for you. So those are ways in which I feel like I've grown spiritually, though.
Sure.
It is a more inner peace.
Well, so with our last few minutes here, we've got about 10 minutes or so left. Talk to me about the tools that you developed during this time, because for example, one of the ones that I'm most curious about is the very first time I met you, which would have been, I don't know, when was that? July of last year. So just a few months after the scenario you're talking about right now. I walked into your office and you had sand with the rake and that sort of thing. And I knew that you were using it for focus and for calming, but I don't, at that time, I did not know about any of the situation for you. And I'm curious if that was something that you leaned on, if there are other like physical things that you did, like physical practices, as opposed to mental practices which is what we've been talking about today for the most part.
Well, with that, the little Zen garden, I have it here and I don't use it. It is something that my kids have made such a mess of when they visit me that it's just kind of a plaything. I redid my office. How about that? So my office that you walked into and the way it is right now looks a bit different. I brought plants in and different pieces that I wanted to hang up. But I made the lighting different, rearranged it so that for me, this could be a place of calm. The feeling of it before reminded me of stress. And I needed to reduce that.
Sure.
So in some sense, just reorganizing and then how I decorated. I mean, that sounds lame, but I mean, I try to put certain images around that remind me of good things. What'd you say, Alan? Because I didn't hear that.
I said that is not lame. I do that specific thing a lot. Like when I'm working in my office is generally fairly calming. I keep it dark in here, blah blah blah. But once I get going on a project, the office gets cluttered, and the more cluttered the office gets, that usually is a parallel for how cluttered my mind is.
Yeah.
And so I've got to really like focus every couple of weeks on rearranging and rethinking and getting back to a place of calm.
Yeah, that helps. I think walking is very important to me, music or no music. I do believe in somatic spiritual experiences, so the physical, like your body. And so I think walking and being present out in the world, moving my body. And through a lot of the time I was sick, I could only do certain kinds of working out. So walking became really, and rhythmically, it was nice. It was nice to steep myself into the world, as I like to say. And get a master's degree in my neighborhood. You start to notice the rhythms of the neighbors and their animals, and you just start to see people and things and plants change. And that noticing my place-based thinking and living, very important. Being grounded and rooted in more than just a zip code, but a place with its psychogeographical structures. Very important to me. I do now, before, like church on Sundays, man. So for those of you who don't know about that world, I mean, I come in, I got meetings right away, and then I got to go like help lead worship, 2 different kinds of services, 2 different spaces. The way in which I try to preach now after this is I try to use no notes, because I want it to come out of my body. I want to perform it. I want it to be, it's not memorized, but I want it to be spontaneous. And not everyone can do it that way. That's just the way I can. And so, but what I do is I listen to music and I get into my body and I dance around, man. I just try to be bodily. I go into the sanctuary. I kneel at the end of our aisle before the altar, and I prostrate. I pray. I touch every pew and pray for the people that will be coming. So I make it very physical. I have a little altar I built in my office here with sacred images under a piece of art and a poem. You know, I've got icons that I look at and think on. My favorite novel, one of them anyway, by Cormac McCarthy, is The Road. And there's an admonition in that book from the Father to the Son about carrying the fire. So I'm always using the language of carry the fire to my kids. It's a reminder. It's actually tattooed on my arm with some arrows, one for each of my children to keep. It's about keep going forward, and carrying the fire is a metaphor for going with grace and virtue, even when the world around you is not that. So those are some things. I mean, I have a certain prayer posture I'll take. Contemplation. I do practice, and we'll talk more about what centering prayer is, but I started centering prayer recently. And, I also fast. I mean, I try to rhythmically be in my day. And here, I mean, these are prayer beads that from an Eastern Orthodox monastery that I have on my wrist a lot. And I have a whole bag of them that I bought, and I hand them out to different people who've been praying for me. And I say, hey, look, through my sickness, I prayed these, just rhythmically prayed these. And I prayed the Jesus prayer with each bead, and I got to a darker bead, I'd pray the Lord's Prayer or something like that. And so I often have prayer beads on my joke is that people wear wearables, right? To tell them their blood pressure. Like, this is my wearable.
Nice. I've got one more question for you.
Sure.
Going in a completely other direction with our last few minutes. Okay. So flash forward. I don't remember when it was. It was September, October of the year that we're talking about, last year, when you received your transplant, your liver transplant. I can't imagine how humbling it is to have somebody else literally die or give up their organ for me to continue living. I think that would be a really, really profound thing for me to try to grapple with. Have you experienced anything like that? Like how do you deal with that particular idea?
Yeah, that might be a whole nother episode, frankly, but I can tell you that I was walking on a walk one day, and I went on, did a Facebook Live thing to give people an update on my progress. After the surgery in October, I was out for 6 weeks. Usually people are out 6 months, but I was out 6 weeks because things were just going so well for me. And so I was out trying to get my strength back, and I paused and I said, hey, and I started talking, and I said something about how this person died, and that I would live in it. It just hit me emotionally. I started cracking, started getting teary on the video, and I didn't expect it. I wouldn't have done it. I would not have gone and done the video if I thought that would happen. And there's another gentleman, his name's Jim Street, who is a pastor and used to be a professor, and he has contacts. We have mutual friends, and he was dying in the hospital, and one of my colleagues knew him, so they said, let's go see him. And he needed a heart, but he wasn't going to get a heart. And it was the 11th hour, and on his deathbed, a heart came in. And I thought we were going there to basically give him last rites. And his life's turned around. I mean, he's retired and everything now, but he's healthy. So he saw it and he sent me a message and he said, he goes, it seems like you're suffering from a little survivor's guilt, which is really common. He said, but think of it this way. He says, it is not the case that this person gave their life so that you could live. It's not like a Jesus sacrifice.
Right.
This guy didn't choose to die so that you could live, right? It's not that. It is more the case that this guy happened to die. And he had made a choice in his life, or his loved ones did, that his organs would be used to save someone else's life. It happens to be the case that this person did die. They made that choice, and because of it, you get to live. And that subtle distinction helps with some of the guilt.
Absolutely.
However, it means that when I go out to dinner and someone says, would you like to share a glass of wine? My doctors don't ever want me drinking alcohol ever again because they don't know how my body will process it. But is it going to kill me to have a glass of wine? I don't think so. But the sincerity, the severity, the profundity of this gift is such that I need to honor it with my life. And the way that I process this is actually with my therapist, when we're trying to find just a simple metaphor for a dummy like me to figure out how to think of it. And it was like, look, what do you do in a relay race when they hand you the baton? Yeah. You run. This guy handed you the baton. Now, he didn't actually choose to, but you got the baton. So what do? You run. So you got the baton, Jarrod. You better do something worthwhile with it. And that is sort of an emotional / spiritual directive for me. It's like, well, I better not waste. This could have gone to someone else, and I better not fritter my life away or, ruin it, or, I better do something positive with this life. I mean, that's how I feel. In a very similar kind of analogy, and you're at the communion table in a Christian church, this is my body, which is given for you. Like eat my flesh and drink my blood for your healing. Now, what are you going to do with that? Okay, well, here is my liver for you. Now, what are you going to do with that? There's this kind of similar sort of, well, it's a profound gift. I hope I don't squander it.
Sure. All right. I think on that note.
Okay. All right. Well, friends, listen, I hope this hasn't been boring for these past 2 episodes listening to Alan's questions about my one personal journey, but it is so personal and spiritually enriching for me, this experience, that I really felt in some way like we should share it. We're going to get back to practices and habits from broader traditions that can be helpful for everyone's use in the broader world. But I will tell you that this experience for me, I like to think of it as a spiritual pilgrimage. We all start on pilgrimages for the purposes of transformation. And I realized going through it that like each step in the journey with the right focus is a pilgrimage. It just requires the intention and purpose. And I also realized that I was on a journey or a pilgrimage that I didn't know I was taking. I didn't have a clue that I started it, but I was on it. And but with the right tools, your steps can become transformative, even mundane steps. So more to talk about pilgrimages later, but think about where you're going. That's all I can say is think about where you're going. And if you need me, reach out. I should also tell people that. So, look us up, send me an email, especially if you are someone who is thinking about becoming a donor or is going through that process. I'd love to talk to you. For now, I wish you all the best. God bless.
All right. Well done, sir.